Welcome to Inside India. I'm Emily Tan, sitting in for Sri Jegarajah. Here are your headlines. Oil prices rebounding after another hefty fall. A fragile truce between Israel and Iran still seems to hold. Questions, though, swirling about Trump's maximum pressure campaign on Tehran after he said China can continue to buy Iranian oil. Foxconn gets the regulatory nod to invest in India and the U.S. in a plan totaling over $2 billion.
And I'm Sherry Kang coming to you live from Tianjin Summer Davos. The Chinese Premier Li Qiang really setting the tone on where China stands in this U.S.-China trade dynamics. He's pointing out the rising risk of fragmentation in global supply chains while vowing to turn China into a mega consumer market.
We are tracking Asian markets on this Wednesday hump day, and we have quite a bit of positivity playing out, but some spots of red. Now you can see that is creeping in there. We've got fractional gains and fractional losses. This after we have a shaky ceasefire that is seeming to hold over in Israel and Iran. Of course, the Mideast story that we've been tracking for the last almost 2 weeks. We have the Nikkei 225 down 0.1%. The Kospi tipped higher ever so slightly at 31.05. The TAIEX higher by 0.7%. Looks to be, together with the Hong Kong market, the outperformer on this board today, both higher by about 0.75%. We have the SET index in Thailand down 0.2%. Oil prices falling 6% overnight on expectations that tensions in the Middle East would cool and that oil supply would face minimal disruption. Right now, we're looking at light crude trade at $65.20, gaining 1.25%. Brent crude at $67.96. The shaky ceasefire between Israel and Iran seems to be holding. We saw President Trump lashing out at the two countries after early violations of the truce, and now U.S. intelligence suggesting the U.S. airstrikes did not eradicate Iran's nuclear capability. Dan Murphy joins us now live from Dubai. Dan, give us an update.
Ems, good morning again to you. Well, the ceasefire between Israel and Iran is still holding, but it is on shaky ground. President Trump has slammed both countries for breaking the terms of this truce late yesterday and lashed out at both Tehran and Tel Aviv. Here's what he said.
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I'd never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that.
This fragile truce followed a rapid escalation over the weekend. Iran launched missiles at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. It's a critical U.S. stronghold in the Gulf in direct retaliation for American strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear sites. Israel followed up with additional strikes of its own, but at the core of this standoff today is a dispute over the actual impact of those U.S. strikes. And of course, we've been following this really closely as well. While Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu both claimed that Iran's nuclear program was obliterated, a leaked classified assessment from the Defense Intelligence Agency tells a different story today, claiming these strikes only set back Iran's program by 3 to 6 months, with much of its core infrastructure still operational. And of course, what's interesting is the White House is firmly pushing back on that today, saying that report is only set up to discredit the U.S. president. Ems?
Dan, and thank you very much for your update live from Dubai. Meantime, Han Hai Precision, or Foxconn, getting regulatory approval for its $2.2 billion investment in India. Foxconn will be investing in its India unit via a Singapore subsidiary. The Apple supplier has been trying to diversify its production away from China to build iPhones and its components. This investment will likely be used to boost its production capacity in India, where Foxconn is building multiple facilities. The Indian markets come online in about 45 minutes, and here's what Gift Nifty futures are indicating. We've got flashing green there. We should see some positivity for the Indian markets when they come online shortly. Diraj Nim is an economist, FX strategist at ANZ, and joins us now. Diraj, very good morning, and thanks for joining us today. Over the last couple of days, we have been taking a very close look at the Indian currency, the rupee. Of course, very sensitive to oil moves, and of course, as we've seen, the economy is stable. The rupee is among one of the most sensitive in terms of emerging markets when it comes to higher oil prices. What do you make of the moves in the currency that we're seeing?
Well, thank you, Emily. I think it's well expected. I mean, oil prices are one of the biggest risks for the Indian rupee movements, and it was what was playing out for the last few days, especially since the oil prices touched $75 and above. I think that with the truce holding up still, even if on a shaky ground, the market sentiment towards the rupee should improve. We saw yesterday rupee fell to about 86. And I think that if oil prices go further down, it could go back to its previous range of 85, 85 and a half. Overall, I would say that the pressure on the rupee was not extraordinary from the recent geopolitical tensions, but of course, it was one of the underperformers in the region.
We've been tracking whether there was a need for the RBI and intervention. Of course, that would happen. I believe the key threshold is 87. Of course, we are well off that level right now. But in terms of any moves by the central bank there, what would it take for them to move? And is 87 the key number?
I would think so. I think 87 technically points to be a level where the Reserve Bank of India could intervene to stabilize the currency if exchange rate gets to that level. We also have to be mindful that currently the inflation situation in India, at least from a headline inflation perspective, is very benign. So that perhaps increases the tolerance threshold for imported inflation as far as a weaker currency is concerned. But I do think that 87, is a level around which the RBI might start intervening if at all we see a depreciation of the rupee towards that level. Otherwise, I believe that the Reserve Bank of India's buying of FX reserves could remain intermittent and sporadic.
As we look at liquidity in India, the central bank on Tuesday conducted a 7-day variable rate reverse repo auction worth 1 trillion rupees, and that follows a review of the liquidity conditions. They also said that they're not going to be conducting a 14-day main operation, which was originally scheduled for Friday. How is the RBI doing in regulating liquidity?
I think the growing sense is that the Reserve Bank of India is not very comfortable with a very, very large liquidity surplus in the banking system, because the overnight call rate, the weighted average call rate, which is the operating target of the monetary policy, is substantially below the repo rate towards the lower end of the policy rate corridor. I think with these actions, the Reserve Bank of India is trying to bring it closer to the repo rate, if not higher than that, of course. But I do think that some amount of liquidity surplus in the banking system will sustain, because that will be required for monetary policy transmission, especially after the outsized 50 basis point cut at the June meeting. So although, I do think with the recent actions, the Reserve Bank of India is conveying a message that the liquidity surplus will taper. But given the fundamental factors such as government spending, etc., we do think that it will remain in a decent surplus, if not large enough that we have seen in the recent weeks.
As we are watching the RBI, the central bank, you use the words light touch intervention. What do you mean by that?
Well, look, like I said, the rupee is more or less in a comfortable space. There is no extraordinary pressure on the rupee to appreciate or depreciate, as we've also seen in the recent few days. So the Reserve Bank of India, especially under the new governor Malhotra, has had a little bit of a hands-off approach with the rupee's exchange rate, unlike in the previous regime where it was tightly managed. So I do think that the Reserve Bank of India's FX intervention, which should generally be guided by fundamentals, is in no urgent need to move in either direction. So if you look at the rupee's competitiveness, well, the real effective exchange rate index has substantially eased in the recent months, implying improved competitiveness. So there is no extraordinary need for the Reserve Bank to buy FX reserves from the market to weaken the rupee from a competitiveness perspective. At the same time, the appreciation pressure on the rupee has been minimal, possibly because of India's negative net international investment position. And that means that the Reserve Bank of India does not have to contend with a stronger rupee by buying FX reserves. Having said that, I do think the light touch phrase, as far as intervention goes, comes from the fact that we still expect that the Reserve Bank of India will intermittently or sporadically buy FX reserves. They have about $40 to $45 billion worth of forward book maturing over the period of 1 year, which they will have to pay off from their reserves. So that still is a large number, and that could be cushioned by some FX reserves purchases whenever an opportunity arises.
Why would we see wild swings or volatility? What do you make of that, and how does the central bank control that?
Look, I really don't think any wild or volatile period is there on the cards, at least from the global cues that we are seeing in the markets today. But of course, the world remains ever more uncertain than before. So not to rule out any potential upcoming episodes, whether it's of geopolitical nature or financial market nature. But I do think that the rupees trading within this 85 to 86.5 band is relatively, freer than it would have been before. So I do think that Reserve Bank of India will obviously intervene at levels where it thinks that expectations need to be managed, or where they think that exchange rate moves may begin to have an impact on fundamentals of the economy, namely growth and inflation.
The Prime Minister has says that he wants to make the rupee more accessible. How can India go about globalizing its currency?
Look, it's a tough task. I mean, as analysts, we do understand that for a currency to be globally acceptable, one, its role in global trade has to be more widely accepted, for which India will really need to grow its global exports share or global trade share. And I think we are doing some of the right things for that to happen, but of course, we're still way off from that happening. The second is, what follows from heightened role in global trade is also the role in global capital flows. And I think that will follow the prior steps. But having said that, we have seen in the case of yuan, despite China being the exporter, the large exporter that it is, the yuan's ascent to somewhat of a global currency status has been more or less gradual. For India's case, it's going to be even more gradual. So while I think that this aspiration is right in its heart, it will take a long, long time and a lot more efforts to make that materialize.
Daraj, we're going to have to leave it there today. Thank you very much for joining us today. Daraj Nim from ANZ. Coming up next, we head over to the Summer Davos. We go back to Tianjin and with a conversation with the Hong Kong Financial Secretary Paul Chan. You don't want to miss that. Keep it here on CNBC. Let's head back out to Tianjin, where heightened geopolitical risk and volatility is front and center at the World Economic Forum. Sherry Kang joins us on the ground and has a very special guest with her.
Yes, I do indeed. And, just to go back to Chinese Premier Li Qiang's speech just this morning at Tianjin Summer Davos, it was very trade heavy and quite a few substantive lines that we can actually work with and talk about with our next guest. Of course, we're talking about Hong Kong's Financial Secretary, Mr. Paul Chan, joining me live this morning. And substantive lines, I say, because some of the key highlights here opposing decoupling, but we are at the risk of seeing sort of rising risk of fragmentation because of the trade war, and that China is willing to work with other countries to seek a common ground. So I think that is really the great setup to talk to you this morning. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you, Sherry.
So what is your key takeaway? Because a lot of what he said could be very relevant to Hong Kong and its future, given the sort of the super connector role that it's been playing between mainland China and the rest of the world.
Yeah, we remain the super connector between the mainland and the rest of the world. And Premier Li also said that multilateralism, rule-based, this is to be upheld. But at the same time, perhaps some of the issues, like the governance system, could be further enhanced to make it more shared prosperity and inclusive. That I entirely agree. And in terms of Hong Kong, for us, it is our unique role as a free port, connecting mainland and the rest of the world. And in the process, no matter it's trade or the financial services sector, a lot of collaboration and cooperation opportunities.
And I do actually, since you mentioned the governance and so on, what role can Hong Kong play in all this? Because Hong Kong recently opened this International Mediation Center in Hong Kong. What's the vision? And didn't we already have the system in place in The Hague, or are you trying to replace what was already there?
Well, actually, we offer an alternative, also an option, particularly a media center in Asia, taking care of the culture, the diversity in our part of the world, could be a natural choice for some of the jurisdictions and business enterprises seeking to have an amicable resolution of the disputes. So, at the same time, I think for Hong Kong going forward, our uniqueness is being a free port. Anytime, goods, talents, capital, and data freely move in and freely move out. And this could be used as a platform by any business which are interested in tap the mainland or the Asian market.
And you mentioned capital, and the recent pledge that you made was by the year of 2027 that Hong Kong is going to take over Switzerland as the global asset management hub. Is that too ambitious?
It is a realistic goal. Actually, the growth in our asset and wealth management business is impressive. And we see strong inflow of money from the GBA area, from the Middle East, and also from ASEAN. So what do we need to do in Hong Kong is to remain competitive, enhance our product offerings, the infrastructure, and the ecosystem. And Hong Kong, apart from investment opportunity, we have a very strong philanthropic community as well. So for wealthy families, it's not just talking about financial return, but making great contribution to mankind and humanity.
And so far in this interview, I feel like in my vision, I see this sort of bipolarization, that two different worlds operating sort of separately, the Western world and sort of the Hong Kong heavily reliant on China and global South. Is that the right vision?
Well, for Hong Kong, on the one hand, traditional market, US, Europe, very important. We will remain a gateway and a key connector. But at the same time, we need to seek new capital, new market. That is why we need to diversify also into global South, Middle East, ASEAN, for example. Take our stock market, for example. Great liquidity, doing very well in the past 18 months. A lot of companies lining up for listing. But our vision is our stock exchange can be more international. We welcome more companies from the Middle East, from ASEAN to come to Hong Kong for listing as well. And at the same time, supporting mainland companies in their global ambition, business expansion, like recently CATL.
Yeah, that was a big one, and Hong Kong's IPO market is just sort of having its own moment for sure. Can we get to the tariff situation?
Certainly.
What is the conversation between Hong Kong and the U.S. government right now? Because I didn't really pick up on any visible movements or communications between Hong Kong and the U.S. in terms of the tariff levels.
We are a founding member of WTO, and we all along pledged to support the multilateral rule-based system. So through the participation in WTO, we contribute the views from this part of the world. Say, for example, responding to your earlier question about these multinational organizations, I think perhaps in the future, more attention should be paid to the views from this part of the world and involvement of jurisdictions from the Global South in the process of decision-making, in the process also in terms of focus of future directions, priorities.
Are you frustrated that Hong Kong has been sort of locked together with China?
Not at all. Challenges on the one hand, of course, but also opportunities. Say, for example, stock market is one example, and also recently the uprise in our stock market is not just the mainland capital. We have seen a lot of capital from Europe, US, Middle East and Asia coming. So it is important for us to identify the trend and also position ourselves properly in the right direction to serve both well.
If you look at the global financial markets behavior, we're pricing in peace in the Middle East and some kind of meaningful trade agreement between the U.S. and many of these countries that are facing high level of tariffs. Do you think that is the right expectations going forward at some point in the near future? Or should Hong Kong and many other countries should be bracing for some kind of new form of global collaboration?
Well, the geopolitics will be there. So for us in Hong Kong, it's important to ensure financial security, financial stability. But at the same time, I think the technological innovation, the wave of technology companies coming to Hong Kong for listing, the wave of mainland companies seeking global opportunities will give us strong momentum in terms of our stock market development. But at the same time, we position Hong Kong as an international exchange, connecting international capital and mainland Asia opportunities.
Being an international exchange, what has been your conversation over the last few days or so, watching the situation between Israel and Iran and U.S. getting involved? I mean, Hong Kong has been really trying to capitalize on some of the business relationship in the Middle East as well. Are you reviewing, giving some business relations or conversations a second thoughts? Are you putting anything on hold at the moment?
Well, the geopolitics, of course, important. What is happening in the Middle East, we have been paying very close attention. Number one is for financial stability and security. And number two, I think our overall strategy in terms of opening up new market, attracting new capital sources, Middle East and ASEAN will remain unchanged. This is the mega trend. Despite in between, there are ups and downs, there are different challenges, but the mega trend won't change.
And Global South, the opportunities there, is Hong Kong staying committed?
Of course. And we treasure the opportunities to work with these emerging economies, because it's not just about investment, about business, but in pursuit of common goals, say, for example, green transition, climate change, and also in the process we share with them the best practice in financial services, in financial regulations, as well as regulatory frameworks.
Really quickly before I let you go, regarding Hong Kong's property market, a lot of eyeballs on what's going on with New World development. Many are whispering whether this is going to be another Evergrande moment in Hong Kong property market and ripple effects potentially. What are your lines around that?
I don't think so. I think the residential property market has been stabilizing. The office and retail, of course, need some time to digest the stock. But at the same time, our developers, on the whole, are quite strong financially. And in the process of this transformation, some of them may need to adapt to some adjustments. And in the process, the government and the Hong Kong MA, the financial regulators and the banks are taking a accommodative attitude to help them steer through this time of challenge.
Accommodative attitude. I think a lot of people could take comfort from that. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for your time this morning. That was, of course, Paul Chan, Financial Secretary of Hong Kong. Emily, it's back to you for now.
Thank you very much. Sherry Kang with the Hong Kong Financial Secretary. We'll get back out to the World Economic Forum in Tianjin in just a bit. Multilateralism is also on the agenda this time. We will speak to Satish Shankar of Bain and delve deeper into what this means for economies in the Asia Pacific. Do stay tuned. We'll be right back. Chinese Premier Li Qiang calling for win-win solutions in the current fragmented economic environment. Elaine Yu joins us from Tianjin, where Premier Li was speaking earlier.
Emily, Premier Li has wrapped up his tone-setting speech, and it has some strong coded language for the U.S., even though he didn't specifically mention geopolitical tensions with the U.S. or name the Iran-Israel conflict. So he said or called for opposing decoupling, and he warned of the rising risks of global industrial supply chains fragmenting. And he said engaging in the international economy is a way of, quote, reshaping the rules and orders. So he is very much focused on the tariff negotiations with the 90-day truce coming up for the rest of the world next month and for China specifically in August. So he also urged all parties to refrain from, quote, politicizing or securitizing the economic and trade issues excessively. So again, he's really emphasizing the trade relations that is taking center stage at his speech. And with the Vietnamese Prime Minister and Ecuadorian President in attendance, he also plugged the rise of the global South. And very much this fits with the multipolar vision that China has been talking up recently. Let's take a look at what he said.
The global economic and trade landscape is going through deep transformations and adjustments, all happening at a staggering speed and scale. This requires us to look beyond the complex and intricate dynamics and grasp the underlying trends and characteristics of these changes. As I see it, we need to pay particular attention to the following. First, the economic and trade system is becoming more diverse, and the global South is rapidly gaining strength. While trade is weakening in developed economies, which represents the overall trend, global South countries, which account for about 70% of the global population, are emerging as a vibrant market.
So at a time as the U.S. is turning more protectionist and other countries are also responding to that, China really cast itself as different against this image. Premier Li said they will open up the vast untapped markets for business in various countries. And he said China warmly welcomes enterprises from all over the world to invest in China. So it's very much trying to set itself as the open player, unlike the U.S. Emily, back to you.
Elaine Yu recapping the opening plenary from Li Qiang. Thank you very much. We are counting down now to the market open in India, and this is how we are shaping up. Tracking gains, Gifty Nifty futures expected a higher open, higher by 0.1%. The Nifty will open at 25,044. India's Defense Minister Rajnath Singh will be in China's Qingdao today. Singh will be taking part in bilateral meetings with his Chinese and Russian counterparts as part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO, defense ministers meeting. While Pakistan is also an SCO member, there is no clarity if India will be holding any meetings with the country's delegation. India is expected to reiterate its stance on eliminating terrorism and call for better trade and economic cooperation, according to an official handout. Another key meeting we're watching is the NATO summit in the Netherlands. U.S. President Donald Trump is now in The Hague to attend the summit. He's set to meet with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte as doubts remain about U.S. commitment to NATO's mutual defense alliance. CNBC's Steve Sedgwick has more in this report.
An absolutely pivotal couple of days here at the NATO summit in The Hague, with world premiers of the 32 nations descending upon the Dutch capital. It's very interesting that Donald Trump is coming here looking for a firm commitment, a 5% level of defence spending as a percentage of GDP from all the European partners. Of course, it was back in 2018 when the president, then Donald Trump, in his first term, lambasted Europe for not getting to the 2% target that had been agreed in 2014 at a NATO summit in Wales. Now the president is asking for 5%. Now, how we get there, that is going to be very, very interesting to see. And actually, the Secretary General of NATO, that is Mark Rutte, has been working very hard with all the NATO nations to get them to commit to 3.5% of firm NATO defence and military spending, plus another 1.5% spent on associated costs, such as resilience, such as better infrastructure, such as combating cyber warfare as well. There are concerns that there are some holdouts there as well, and we understand Pedro Sanchez, the Spanish Prime Minister, has raised some very big concerns with the Secretary General of NATO about whether Spain can get that without having a cost for a lot of social programs in its own country. But one thing is very different 12 months on from Washington, D.C., and that is the most important economy in Europe, that is Germany, has now got a firm commitment to have open-ended spending on defence and 500 billion euros spent on infrastructure. Friedrich Merz, who is seen as an Atlanticist, is very keen to upgrade the Bundeswehr to the 21st century. And with that kind of leadership, actually there is more wind in the sails of the European defence situation, and hopefully that will be enough to satiate the US president. Steve Sedgwick for CNBC in The Hague.
Meantime, one of NATO's Asian allies, Japan, has decided to skip the summit this time. Lin joins us now with more. Lin, what does this tell us about the U.S.-Japan relations and the trade negotiations?
Well, Em, over the last 10 days or so, if you look at what has happened, perhaps the optics don't look so great. You have the fact that trade negotiations are still in stall mode ahead of that July deadline. You have Prime Minister Ishiba pulling out of that NATO summit at the last minute, with his office only citing, quote unquote, various circumstances as the reason. And then a report in the last couple of days that says that Japan has pulled out of or delayed a 2+2 meeting this year because of concerns around what Washington is demanding that Japan pay for defense. And on that point, I went to the Pentagon to get some clarification about what it is that they are looking for, and they reiterated the comments that Pete Hegseth made just a couple of weeks ago here in Singapore, basically saying that it makes sense that Asia's allies to the US also try and keep up in terms of that 5%, like in Europe and like what has been and what is being discussed at the NATO summit. It's important to point out that Japan's government has not officially set out what it is that Washington is demanding. Is it 3%? Is it 3.5%? Is it 3.5 plus 1.5%? But regardless, though, this is indeed a sore point for Tokyo, particularly in terms of the timing. Japan is a heavily indebted country. The government is under pressure to spend more ahead of the upper house elections as well to win votes, coming just a couple of weeks after, as some analysts have said, Japan was at risk of losing control of the long end of its yield curve as well, although that seems to have subsided, at least for the time being. But given the security arrangement that does exist between Japan and the US, born from the Constitution, born from history, it does mean that the US has leverage on this point. So we could see that persistence of pressure to come as well. Em.
Lin, thank you very much for that. Let's get back out to Sherry Kang in Tianjin at the Summer Davos, where Premier Lee was speaking just a few minutes ago. Sherry, back out to you.
Yeah, and we got a lot of substantive lines, I think, in terms of rising risks of fragmentation. Not that we didn't really know, but for him to say that while he's also adding that China opposes decoupling. So a lot of interesting lines that did come out of it. And really the vision for China going forward, what kind of economic model that he is committed to, and obviously a lot of consumer focus that we saw in the summer Davos speech as well. So on that note, I'm going to bring in the next guest of a Tianjin Summer Davos 2025, Satish Shankar. He is the head of APAC at Bain. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. When it comes to China, you did mention off camera a lot of excess capacity. So what's going on there in terms of amid this ongoing trade war at the moment? What are your readings?
China has done a wonderful job in building leadership in many strategic industries. For example, solar panels, electric vehicles, batteries, and so on. However, the competition has been brutal. There's been significant capacity added, perhaps in excess of demand. And so there is excess capacity in the industry, and sooner or later, perhaps later, given the current environment, we're likely to see eventual consolidation of these different markets.
So consolidation of these markets, are you talking about EVs and solars, or is there anything that I'm missing right now?
It's primarily EVs and solars, but there are also some other industrial businesses where this is the phenomenon that is taking place.
And hasn't it been what sort of the playbook that China has with a lot of strategic industries that let them go sort of wild with innovation and production, and then at some point there are so many players that the profits are coming down, prices are coming down, and there is a major consolidation? Do you think we're just sort of seeing yet another cycle of that?
I do think, having heard Premier Lee's speech this morning, that there is a real focus on moving China from a primarily supply-driven model to a much more balanced economic model, and to really spur domestic consumption. So that is indeed very good news for the market.
What are you seeing in terms of your clients?
Yeah.
Are they delaying critical decisions right now, or are they moving even faster because of these geopolitical considerations that they're making right now?
The most dynamic companies are taking a positive and proactive approach, both towards the short term and the long term. In the short term, they're focused on using AI to take out costs, to dramatically improve customer experience, and to try and launch new business models. So that's something we're seeing a lot of. Equally, taking a longer term view, they're stepping back. They're focused on three things. They're focused on prediction, identifying the 3 or 4 critical trends in their industry, and how they can get conviction around those trends and how they can capitalize on those trends. The second is adaptability. They're realizing that it's a much more uncertain environment. They therefore need to have to be adaptable, an agile organization, a willingness to experiment with new business models, etc. And finally, resilience. It's a far more uncertain environment, so they should be able to withstand sudden shocks which are not expected, and they need the balance sheet flexibility, the strategic flexibility, and the operational flexibility.
How do you stay adaptable in this kind of environment, and what does that really mean in terms of a supply chain? Does it mean entering as many different markets as possible, just have smaller production capacity, not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow in the headlines?
In terms of supply chain, the first priority is to ensure that your markets your supply chain is aligned to the markets you service. And to put all your eggs in one basket through a large global factory, for instance, is outdated. You need to ensure that you understand your customers of today, customers of the future, what are the likely tariff situations and the range of scenarios, and how do you ensure that your supply chain is configured to deal with all of this. So this does mean adding some costs, adding some capital expenditure, but it ensures that you're safe and your business continues to flourish even in very different scenarios.
So you were at Summer Davos in Dalian last year. What is really the biggest sort of takeaway? What is the biggest contrast that you can draw from last year and this year in terms of the level of risk that people are talking about and in terms of uncertainty people are trying to digest at the moment?
It's very clear that the level of risk and level of uncertainty has gone up. Liberation Day tariffs resulted in a fair degree of confusion. However, Asia has been very resilient, and what comes through is the optimism of commentators in Tianjin at the WEF here, that we can indeed cope with these crises. We've handled the Asian financial crisis, SARS, the global financial crisis, and more recently COVID. And through all of this, Asia has thrived. So there's confidence that the region will adapt, change their business models, have more regional cooperation and regional trade, and eventually prevail.
So do you think because businesses had a lot thrown at them over the last decade or so, that this is just yet another a challenge, a sort of a test, but they will get by. Do you see businesses having to find another solution, which could be being acquired or acquiring somebody else in order to stay, in order to survive and grow more?
In our experience, difficult times are when leaders consolidate their leadership, extend their leadership position. So we have no doubt that over the next 2 to 3 years, you will see industries which are highly competitive consolidate, and leaders can take this opportunity to extend their leadership by identifying potential targets and waiting for the right time for the M&A markets to be back, for the funding environment to be perhaps a little bit more rosy so that they can capitalize on this opportunity.
And rosier funding environment could mean rates coming down pretty much across the board. Is that what moves the needle for the M&A market?
Low funding rates are usually very positive to M&A markets, but our view is that we may not go back to the old interest rates of old, which were much, much lower. But as long as the market has certainty and is able to price in interest rates, I think strong companies with strong balance sheets can continue to do M&A.
What about India? I mean, we touched on China, and India has been viewed by some as this, pretty formidable China plus one strategy and market. What are the risks and opportunities that you see in the Indian market?
The good news for India is that unlike some other countries, for instance in Southeast Asia, their exports as a percentage of GDP is only in the region of 20%. So while US tariffs impact them somewhat, the domestic story is strong enough to withstand the challenges they're facing. We continue to see strong consumption growth in India. The sentiment in India is very positive. We see many of our clients looking very hard at India for the domestic story rather than just the export story.
Right.
So overall, it feels like they're well placed despite all the challenges.
What are some of the factors that could make your clients interested in India, getting into India, a bit more hesitant?
So far, what we have found is that in the past there was a lot of regulatory uncertainty. That has gone away. I think India has become a place where regulatory certainty exists. You actually can see the domestic story rather than it just being a promise. And so actually our clients are very excited about the prospects in India. It's a challenging operating environment because local competition is formidable. But if you're willing to stay the course and you have something interesting to offer the market, you can definitely benefit from the India story.
Are there certain sectors that you're particularly bullish about in India?
I think manufacturing, as overall industrial manufacturing, is a huge priority for the government. India is not punching its weight in that sector, and they're starting to create great opportunities. There are some early success stories with the likes of Apple. So that feels like a very promising sector. Consumer products continues to see very strong growth. There are always the ups and downs, but in general, the story has been very positive. Financial services. So across the board, we feel very good about the India prospects.
And overall, when it comes to India, what if India wants to move up the value chain? Then it becomes yet another China story. Do you think the Indian government is taking a more interest in sort of going beyond the low-base manufacturing hub?
I think that the India story is ultimately about domestic consumption. It's a large market. We have 1.5 billion people. There's plenty to do there in terms of domestic consumption. Over time, India will become a global hub for certain products. That's inevitable and will benefit from exports. But I think governments have learned that a heavily export-oriented strategy is very vulnerable in the current environment.
And before I let you go, I have to ask you an AI question. And World Economic Forum actually did a survey recently. Only about a little over 40% of the economists surveyed there saw AI being a commercially disruptive factor. I thought people were very bullish about AI and what it can do in terms of changing the world and productivity and so on. What is the Bain's call at the moment on AI and its power to really disrupt commercial activities?
We believe that AI is going to be a massive force. I mean, some say as important as the Industrial Revolution, but we see tangible business benefits in AI. And we are doing work across a whole range of topics with our clients, including improving sales productivity, leveraging AI tools, taking out costs, making work, removing the drudgery from work to make it more exciting for employees. Early movers are starting to see the benefits. You have to be patient. You have to play the long game on AI, but we're already starting to see tangible benefits that our clients are reaping as a result of implementing AI, both in terms of revenue growth as well as cost reduction.
All right, some good color there. Thank you so much, Satish, for that commentary. And of course, that was Satish Shankar from Bain joining us live from Tianjin Summer Davos. And Emily, it's back to you.
Thank you very much. We're watching the World Economic Forum. Thank you very much, Sherry Kang. We take it back to the Indian markets after this break and look at some of the top stories in the region. We'll be back in 2. Indian markets are coming online, and we are tracking the Nifty 50. Traded like this, higher by 0.5%, 25,174, and the dollar rupee at 85.92. Checking in on how the Adani Group's stocks are doing in the open today. This as Adani Green was in the spotlight late last year. Multiple people from the company's top management, including its chairman, faced indictment from the United States. The allegations against the group's top brass included bribery and misleading its U.S. investors. Chairman Gautam Adani speaking out about the case, saying no one from the group has been charged at the company's AGM. And we are seeing strength across the board here. Adani Enterprises shares up 1%.
The facts are that no one from the Adani Group has been charged with violating the FCPA or conspiring to obstruct justice. And as we cooperate with the legal processes, let me also restate that our governance is of global standards and our compliance frameworks are non-negotiable.
And checking in on shares of Tata Motors. The automaker CFO saying that China's rare earth export curbs have not led to any panic buttons just yet, and confirmed that its electric vehicle launches are on track. Remember, China's curbs on rare earth exports have caused global auto companies to flag supply crunch concerns. And we're tracking India's biggest share sale so far this year. HDB Financial Services opens its $1.5 billion offer to retail investors today. The non-banking financial company has raised nearly $400 million from its anchors investors ahead of that. And its parent company, HDFC Bank, India's biggest private lender, is offering selling shares worth 100 billion rupees in the public offer. The weight loss drug market in India now heating up. Novo Nordisk's Wegovy making its debut in the country. The blockbuster drug is expected to reach the pharmacy soon. Wegovy will be facing competition from Eli Lilly's Mounjaro that hit the shelves 3 months ago. Both of these drugs will come at a similar price point, but Wegovy will be available in more dosage variations. And that's all the time we have on this edition of Inside India. Keep watching CNBC. Access Middle East is coming up next.